When a teen calls 911 to say he shot his father, police say it wasn't self-defense. After all, the man begged for his son not to shoot him. But is there more to this case than meets the eye? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Killer Concepts, and the place where we talk about all things true crime. My name is Peyton. If you are new here, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button down below and turn on your post notifications so you do not miss any future content. Staying in theme with the last video, we are going to talk about domestic violence, but this case is a lot different. It is one where police had to really dig behind closed doors to understand what went on in this house and if a teen was justified for shooting his father. After all, he said he did it because he thought his father would kill him if he didn't shoot him first. The teen we are talking about today is 17-year-old Anthony Templet. Keep in mind, this is the age he was in 2019 when the crime was committed, so he is older now. Templet may or may not sound familiar to you, as the Netflix documentary I Just Killed My Dad is about him. I have not seen this documentary. All of my information is from the sources in the description box below. Some may, however, use information from the documentary. I wanted to watch it before making this video, but with Netflix's new household policy, I no longer have it, and I just haven't had the time to make a new account and do all of that. So we're going forward without it. Trigger warning, as we are talking about domestic violence again. This case is a little different than we typically talk about, though. It isn't the typical domestic violence case where you see a significant other abusing another significant other. This is one where you see a father who is abusing his son. With that being said, we are going to dive right into it, as there is a lot to talk about in this case. So we will start by talking about what happened that night, and then we will get into more of the backstory of it all. So in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on June 3rd, 2019, a 17-year-old Anthony Templet would call 911 and tell the dispatcher that he had just killed his father. Anthony's father was 53-year-old Burt Templet, but he would not die until a few days after the shooting. According to Women's Health magazine, when Anthony called 911, he said to the dispatcher, quote, "He tried to attack me. Then we got into a fist fight. Then I ran in his room, closed the door, and got a gun. As I unlocked the door, he tried to, and then I shot him. I just killed my dad. I shot him 3 times, end quote. Authorities would be dispatched to the home, and they would report that when they originally arrived, they saw no signs of a physical struggle or evidence that it was shooting in self-defense. What they did find was 53-year-old Burt in the bathroom lying in a pool of blood. Oxygen reports that Assistant District Attorney Dana Cumming told Kill or Be Killed that Burt had been shot in the arm, chest, and head. Anthony would tell the authorities that an argument over his phone is what would cause it all. Burt had apparently tried to go through Anthony's phone to see if he had been in contact with Burt's ex-wife, Susan Templet. Anthony said it would escalate as his father was drunk and he would try and hit him. This is when Anthony would run to his room and he would get the gun. Per WAFB 9, he would shoot his father twice before calling 911, but Anthony said he had shot him 3 times as he was trying to shoot his father in the head. And enough to prove that a murder had occurred with physical evidence and a confession, they had enough to go after 17-year-old Templet for the crime. Anthony Templet would be arrested and charged with manslaughter, and then this would be up to second-degree murder for the shooting and subsequently the murder of his father, Burt Templet, once he died in the hospital. So according to Oxygen, he would face up to 40 years in prison, and this is when defense attorney Ambo would take on his case. Ambo said this was because it was obvious the killing was justified, especially after learning more about Anthony's life and all the boy had endured. So Templet's family would say that the teen had acted in self-defense and that they believed him because he had been subject to abuse by his father for years. The prosecutor in Templet's case would even confirm this by saying Anthony had been isolated by his father. His father would not let him have an education. He would tell the judge he never had a formal education and he couldn't remember the last grade he had completed. Obviously, this was super concerning. Investigators would actually find out that Anthony and Burt had been living by themselves in the house for about 4 months after Susan had moved out. Anthony had even told a detective, quote, "I really don't like him," end quote. When this all happened, Burt's estranged wife, Susan Templet, would come forward. She would give the investigator more background on the family. She had met Burt Templet when she was a single mom with a 6-year-old son. Anthony had been 7 at the time, and Susan says, quote, "Burt had told me that Anthony's mom was deceased," end quote. Oxygen reports that Susan said that even though Anthony was really open around her, when he was around his father, he was, quote, "a completely different child," end quote. But she would soon understand why. When her and her son moved in with Burt and Anthony, they would not get married for several years, but it wasn't long until Burt was, quote, "hollering and screaming," end quote, but it would get so much worse than verbal abuse. Burt would start physically abusing the entire family. He would not only use his fists, but objects as weapons. So due to all of this, she would send her son Peyton to live with her ex-husband. Then in 2019, 4 months before the shooting would occur, Susan would reach her tipping point. She told Oxygen, quote, "We got into an argument and he pulled me out of bed by my hair. He punches me in my face 4 times. I saw 3 of my teeth hit the floor," end quote. After the incident, Susan would file a restraining order in February of that year documenting Burt's history of abuse. She would also reference multiple firearms being in the house. However, there was nothing noted about abuse to Anthony in the restraining order. Susan explained this by saying that she believed noting Burt's abuse on Anthony in the restraining order would only put him in more danger. So according to an article by Newsweek in Netflix's I Just Killed My Dad, Anthony detailed years of abuse at the hands of his father. He would tell investigators that Burt would beat him for hours at a time and would psychologically abuse him by controlling his movements, tracking his whereabouts, and installing cameras in the family home. He said, quote, "I was always being tracked by something, whether it be a camera or a mobile app. He wanted to be in control of everything, of me and the rest of the family in that house. I knew he was trying to control me," end quote. After finding out about the years and years of abuse Anthony endured, his attorneys would argue that Anthony thought it was an I kill him or he kills me situation. Ambu stated, quote, "He was legitimately at the end of his rope. He was in a position where he thought his only way out was to kill his father," end quote. So in order to help the teen out of this ordeal and his charge of second-degree murder, Ambo knew that he needed the court and the prosecutor to understand fully what Anthony's life had been like so that their defense was strong enough. They needed to prove that even though Burt had not touched Anthony the night of the murder, that he still felt like he was in imminent danger to justify the shooting. If they didn't form a good enough defense, the 17-year-old was looking at life in prison with no parole. His bond was set at $1 million. So on paper, his attorneys would see that Anthony Templet didn't really exist at all. There was no school or medical record for him. He was kept out of view of the public. He was constantly being watched by his father. Really, the only thing Burt let Anthony do outside of the family home was to work at a local nursery. But according to Oxygen, this employer at the local nursery would end up asking a genealogist after the shooting happened to see if Anthony had any other living relatives besides Burt. The boss had apparently suspected that Anthony could have been kidnapped. The genealogist, Shayna Landry, would make contact with a woman by the name of Teresa in Texas, who would turn out to be Anthony's mother. Remember, the one that was apparently dead, according to what Burt had told Susan? So Anthony's Templet story would just get crazier. Not only was he a 17-year-old who admitted to killing his father and years of abuse, he would turn out to be a kidnapping victim. His mother, Teresa, and her daughter, his sister, Natasha, had been looking for him for years. When Anthony was arrested for shooting his father and his mugshot was released on TV, his half-sister Natasha would see it. Per Women's Health magazine, Natasha claims Burt Templet kidnapped Anthony while the family was living in Texas and that they had been looking for him for over a decade. This actually would make a lot of sense as to why Anthony was not allowed to attend public school after he reached the age of 5. In regards to the kidnapping, Natasha would tell WAFB 9, quote, "After 11 years of waiting to hear if my brother was still alive, he is found. He has been secluded and abused all of these years by his own father. My brave brother had to defend himself for the last time against that evil man," end quote. Natasha would go on to tell news outlets that Anthony had been snatched from their home in Houston, Texas, as well as showing missing boys flyers that had been posted because they were looking for him. Apparently, the family had always thought Burt had been the one who had taken Anthony, especially since Natasha said that the relationship between her mother and Anthony's mother and Burt was always a very violent and volatile one. Ambo would say that they learned Anthony's kidnapping actually happened in the court system. This would leave Teresa and Natasha no way to find him. With all of the new evidence of Burt's past history of abuse, not only to Anthony but to others, as well as the kidnapping news, the team's attorneys would get the bond dropped to $50,000 as long as he go to counseling, get his GED, and wear an ankle monitor. So Anthony Templet would be released from prison 6 months after the murder of his father. Even so, his attorneys would still have to prove in court that he had acted in self-defense. Dana Cummings, the East Baton Rouge Assistant District Attorney, said the strongest piece of evidence that they had pointing at Anthony being guilty of homicide was his father telling him to stop and not to shoot him, and Anthony doing it anyway. However, when all of the new information came to light about his life, she re-evaluated his charges. Cummings said, quote, "It became apparent that this was not your usual case, and that yes, he'd been indicted for second-degree murder. But Jared Ambo and the defense were pushing really hard. Look at this closer. Look at this closer." End quote. After taking a closer look, she would offer to go back to the original manslaughter charge. Ambo would refuse this. Then in March of 2021, Cummings would then look at it again, and after speaking with Anthony's defense attorneys, she would put negligent homicide on the table. Oxygen reports Cummings said, quote, "The charge is the killing of a human being through basically reckless behavior. It felt like the right resolution in this case," end quote. This charge carried no jail time, it wasn't a crime of violence, and it was able to be expunged from Anthony's record, so his team considered this a win. Cummings would tell WAFB 9, quote, "What would time in jail do for this young man who has never actually had a chance to learn or to have friends or to be in the world," end quote. Cummings said, quote, "What would that achieve? I just think it would keep him from ever being able to be productive," end quote. Anthony would be sentenced to 5 years of supervised probation per Newsweek and credited for time he already served. He would also be expected to finish high school, do counseling, and find full-time employment or education. He would be 19 by this time, and at the time he told reporters outside of the courthouse, quote, "It feels good. I'm very happy," end quote. Bustle states that Anthony told "I just killed my dad," quote, "I just want to be normal. I want to live normally and be happy and just move on," end quote. His attorney, Jared Ambo, quote, "When I saw this injustice, I said, absolutely no way should this kid be in jail," end quote, said Ambo. Quote, "Well, that's the outcome we have. It may not be the thing we have hoped, but this is an imperfect system. We try to find the best possible justice, and I think we got that today," end quote. So where is Anthony now? Anthony Templet has now reconnected with his mom and her side of the family. He is just trying to live a normal life that he should have been able to live way sooner. Most sources report that he is still living in Louisiana and that ever since I just killed my dad, he has pretty much just stayed out of the spotlight, trying to live a normal life. So with that being said, that is all I have for you in this case. I hope you enjoyed it. I think that this is a good one to talk about because it definitely shows that not all things are as they seem. From the outside, people thought Burt Templet probably was a good man, but behind closed doors, he was a very abusive one and an abusive father, and had even kidnapped his son from his mother and basically was telling people that his mother had been deceased. He was not letting, him go to school. I am very happy to see that Anthony Templet has reconnected with his mother and sister and is moving forward from all the trauma and what has occurred. So domestic violence does not always look the same, and this case just really proves that. So if you or anyone you know are suffering from domestic violence, or maybe even think somebody you know or care about may be suffering from domestic violence, please contact the domestic hotline. The information for it is down below in the description box, as well as many other very helpful and important resources. So that is all I have for you today. If you have not done so already, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button down below and turn on your post notifications so you do not miss any future content. Should you have any case suggestions, please send them to killerconceptsvlog@gmail.com or comment them down below. You can also connect with me on social. Before you go, just remember that the world's most dangerous minds hide in the most unlikely places. Stay safe.